Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Murder Aforethought, a Cabrini law novel, by Parker St. John, narrated by Kirt Graves. 1. Maksim. What I can't figure out is why bleeding hearts like you don't do something different once in a while. The desk sergeant leaned back in his chair and scratched his barrel chest. Maksim ignored his skeptical commentary and signed his name in the visitor log. He didn't take the man's attitude personally. He suspected this particular officer distrusted anyone in a suit on principle. You know, when I'm off shift you couldn't drag me within a mile of this place, but you show up here and do it all again for free. He shook his head, as if he thought Maksim had slipped his straitjacket. Geez, man, ever consider just cutting a check to St. Jude's and calling it good? Maksim did that, too. His salary was nauseating, even for a top attorney at Portland's most prestigious law firm. He had more money than he had time or inclination to use, so a significant percentage went to charity. Doling out cash didn't make him feel any more useful to society than practicing corporate law, however, so he made a habit of volunteering at Alexander Cabrini's legal aid clinic. Usually the CLC chose their own clients, but occasionally a request came in from the overworked public defender's office to pick up a pro bono case, or 5. Maksim was always happy to oblige. The other attorneys in Cabrini's stable had families, hobbies, and obligations. Maksim didn't have any of that. He had one thing that he did very well, and it gave him a sense of purpose to use his skills occasionally to benefit someone without a Swiss bank account. "You're on to me, Phil." He clipped his visitor pass to the pocket of his Tom Ford suit and tossed the officer a wink. "I just can't keep away from your handsome mug." An expression of dismay crossed the man's face. He quickly turned his attention back to his computer screen and muttered, "We stowed your guy in room 4. You can wait at the mirror if you want to look at him before you go in." Maksim gave a nod of thanks, but Phil was doggedly plucking away at his keyboard with both index fingers. Portland's central precinct was an old concrete block that inspired a sense of claustrophobia even among the most law-abiding citizens. The main entry was gussied up for photo ops, with glossy floors and a turn-of-the-century wrought iron staircase, but the second floor resembled every other poorly funded government building in existence. Maksim strode down a long, narrow hallway, the Italian leather of his loafers squeaking on the newly polished linoleum. The unadorned walls and fluorescent lighting always reminded him of something from The Shining. He wondered if the design served a purpose. Perhaps it encouraged a sense of impending doom and made suspects eager to strike a bargain. He rarely advised pleading out, of course. It was a waste of his skills, but a stubborn client did occasionally insist. The door to room 4 swung open, and a uniformed officer exited. Maksim was familiar with Officer Clark. He was handsome and dark as night, with a quick grin and a head shaved like a cue ball. He recognized Maksim at once. "Careful with this one, Kovalenko. He's a thug." "Thanks for the warning. Is the observation room free?" Clark unlocked the door next to room 4 and ushered him inside. The room resembled nothing more than a large closet, with a few metal chairs facing an enormous window. The interior was kept purposefully dark, so the occupant of the interview room couldn't see them through the two-way glass. "He's a big fucker," Clark volunteered. "I thought he was about to snap my cuffs like they were made of Twizzlers." Maksim examined the man on the other side of the glass. He was indeed big, with a thick neck and lumberjack shoulders. He completely dwarfed his flimsy plastic chair, like an adult trying to squeeze into a kindergarten desk. His dark head was bowed, and he clasped his uncuffed hands before him on the table. Maksim whistled through his teeth. "He's got forearms like Popeye." And an attitude like Bluto. Clark clicked his tongue. Did he resist arrest? Maksim frowned. He didn't recall any flags in the arrest report, but he could only trust his memory so much when he scanned files on his tablet between morning traffic jams. Nah, Clark said. It's just, he's got this way of looking at you, like he could take you to pieces and dispose of the body, and it wouldn't even be the worst way he spent a Tuesday. Gives me the creeps. I'd take a tweaker any day. Maksim made a non-committal sound and tipped his head to catch a glimpse of his client's downcast face. He liked to get a concrete first impression of his clients before introducing himself. As a defense attorney, he represented everyone to the best of his ability, whether they were guilty or innocent, but most of them attempted to snow him anyway. Even the innocent managed to find something to lie about. It gave Maksim an edge if he could understand the nature of the beast before getting in the cage with it. Not for nothing, Kovalenko, but I'd sleep better if you don't get this one bonded out. It was at that moment the prisoner lifted his head. His expression was the grimmest fucking thing Maksim had ever seen. His eyes were some pale shade, and burning with enough loathing to make Maksim's gut clench. The man wasn't looking directly at them. He couldn't see through the glass. It was his reflection in the two-way mirror that he fixed with such disgust. He was guilty of something, that much was obvious. When Maksim was ready, he entered the lion's den. Clark remained in the hall on the other side of the door. "Valentine Rivetti?" he asked briskly. "My name is Maksim Kovalenko. I'm your public defender." Gray. His eyes were gray. They looked jarringly old in his youthful face. He assessed Maksim silently, with unnerving focus, tracking Maksim's movements as he pulled his tablet from his briefcase and set it on the table. He reminded Maksim of a panther he'd once seen at the Oregon Zoo. Trapped, but dangerous. The man was enormous up close. There was no other word for the way his chest and biceps stretched the fabric of his plain cotton T-shirt. Maksim's gaze lingered on the torture that garment was going through. Had it accidentally shrunk in the wash? Or was Valentine Rivetti making such rapid gains in the gym that he couldn't maintain a wardrobe that fit? Russian? There was a layer of suspicion in Rivetti's tone. Maksim pulled out a chair. American, he answered, but I was born in the Ukraine. Rivetti had stopped slouching and now sat pushed away from the table, thighs spread, as if prepared to move quickly. His gaze flickered from Maksim to the door and mirror, and then back. His posture put Maksim on edge. It wasn't unheard of for clients to attack their own attorneys. Usually they were too strung out on meth or heroin to realize what they were doing. Maksim was athletic enough that he'd never escaped with more than a few scratches, and he was always quick to yell his lungs out for the armed guards on the other side of the door. But if a man the size of Valentine Rivetti chose physical confrontation, there was no way Maksim would survive. That much was certain. He'd be squashed like a bug. His body language wasn't precisely threatening, though. Tension buzzed like a live current beneath his tanned skin, yes, and his gaze was sharp. But he was calm. Far too calm, in fact, for a man about to face his first homicide interview. He was defensive, but he wasn't a loose cannon. "Begging your pardon, sir, but you don't look like any public defender I ever saw." "Is that so?" "You didn't get that suit off the rack, for starters." Maksim chuckled. He was a clothes horse, even among the ranks of his fellow corporate attorneys, and his co-workers at the CLC regularly wore jeans to the office. When they were forced to appear in court, most of them looked like Depression-era vagabonds, wading around in boxy department store suits. "I occasionally offer my services pro bono," he said. "Congratulations. You're the lucky man who came up on my rotation." The squint Rivetti gave him was so skeptical that Maksim had to bite back a smile. He'd learn. Soon enough, Maksim would be the most important person in his life, the key to his freedom, and the only barrier between him and a prison cell. Maksim loved that part. Nothing felt better than winning a client's case and seeing the look of worship in their eyes. Let me assure you that anything you say to me is confidential, even if you incriminate yourself. I can and will represent you to the best of my considerable abilities. Rivetti folded his arms across his chest and leaned back until the legs of his spindly chair creaked. He didn't seem inclined to take Maksim's word at face value. Not that Maksim could blame him. He pulled up a document on his tablet and scanned it. Let's begin with the basics. You're 24 years old, medically discharged from the USMC 3 months ago, and you have a residence on Southeast Division Street, correct? A reluctant nod. Do people call you Valentine? Only my mother. It's Val. Maksim made a note on his tablet, though he wasn't likely to forget. Does your mother live locally, Val? No, sir, he said flatly. She died 2 months ago. Maksim paused. There was a discordant, squashed quality in his tone, but his expression was blank. Maksim didn't offer condolences. He'd hated when people extended their sympathies after his own mother's passing. They didn't mean a damn thing except to give other people something to say in an awkward situation. He merely nodded and made a brief note. Any living relatives in the area? No, sir. Maksim propped his chin in his hand, tapping an index finger thoughtfully against his mouth. And you're unemployed. He clucked his tongue. That makes you a flight risk. If they charge you, your bail will probably be substantial. I can cover it. Ah, yes, of course. I see. You have a hidden income stream. Val kept his mouth shut. Maksim sighed. That leads us to the crime scene they discovered you fleeing during the wee hours this morning. Who was Robert Esposito to you? An indescribable exhaustion crossed the man's face. He squeezed his eyes shut and dropped his chin to his chest. Mr. Rivetti, Maksim prodded. Val? Val raised his eyes and took a deep breath. His eyes were bloodshot and red-rimmed, but the dark smudges beneath them indicated fatigue rather than tears. The arrest report said he was booked at 6 a.m, which meant whatever he'd been doing at Esposito's apartment had been intended for the pale, pre-dawn hours. I never met the guy before, Val said haltingly. I was hoping he had information I needed. Mr. Esposito was a known associate of the Russo crime family. Yes. This information you wanted, was it related to his business dealings? Yes, but I didn't kill him. Of course not, Maksim murmured. But if you had... If I had, I wouldn't have made such a fucking mess, he sneered. Whoever did that was mad as hell or a complete amateur. Which you are not? Val smiled bleakly. I'm angry, all right? Maksim changed tact. You saw the condition of Mr. Esposito's body, how exactly? I knew he wouldn't talk to me willingly, so I planned to take him by surprise. I didn't even have to force entry. The door was unlocked. His eyes took on a strangely distant cast, and Maksim understood at once why he gave Officer Clark the creeps. His tone was clinical, as if he were filing a verbal report. He was on the floor in his living room, shredded like lettuce, so I got the hell out of there. Maksim could appreciate the honesty in his cold recitation. Val was unhappy and inconvenienced, but he wasn't feigning horror he didn't feel. He was mired in some form of guilt, that much was obvious, but Maksim was inclined to believe this crime wasn't the trigger. You really didn't kill him, did you? He'd never yet been wrong predicting a client's innocence. No, Val sighed. He was dead when I got there. I really don't care if I go down for it, though. I just need you to get me bail. I need a little time, that's all." That doesn't sound ominous at all. Val braced his forearms on the table and leaned forward intently. "I don't expect you to believe me, Mr. Kovalenko. I just expect you to do your job and get me through this interrogation. If you can't get the charges dropped, you need to get me out on bail." He cocked his head. "After all that big talk you walked in with, it should be a piece of cake, right?" The determination that hung like a shroud around his client was refreshing after so many years defending the laissez-faire and self-satisfied elite. Maksim relished the challenge. 2. Maksim. They barely had time to cover the basics before a pair of detectives interrupted. Maksim moved across the table and sat beside his stone-faced client. The man was like a furnace, blasting body heat when Maksim leaned close to murmur in his ear, "Answer their questions honestly and without embellishment. Trust me, I'll stop anything we don't want answered." A muscle beneath Val's eye twitched, but that was the only sign he'd heard. Andrea Nilsson sat opposite them and introduced herself as the lead detective. She was the kind of woman who oozed competence from her very pores. Maksim could smell it on her, like faded perfume that never went away. She was middling attractive and approaching middle age, with dishwater hair and tired eyes. He'd crossed paths with her on more than one occasion over the years, and he always enjoyed their encounters. She kept him on his toes, particularly during cases he would ordinarily sleepwalk through. Her new partner was an unknown. He decided to cross his arms and prop up the wall behind Nilsson, possibly attempting to play bad cop. But considering his baby face and the thrum of eagerness surrounding him, Maksim found it more likely he was newly promoted and in training. "How long have you lived in Portland, Mr. Rivetti?" Nilsson asked. "I was born here." "You joined the Marines when you were, 18? "Yes, ma'am." "Where were you stationed?" "Camp Lejeune." They might be necessary to establish a baseline honesty, but the more tedious the questions were, the quicker the police wore down their suspect. The process was similar for both detectives and attorneys. "What did you do there?" Out of the corner of his eye, Maksim witnessed a flush creeping up the back of Val's neck. The man's entire body seemed to tense and harden. "I was part of a DRP unit." "And what exactly is that?" "A deep reconnaissance platoon, ma'am," Val said softly. His eyes were on the table. "2nd Battalion." Maksim considered the bleakness that occasionally surfaced across his client's expression, and the way his old eyes didn't match his appearance. Perhaps the guilt that Maksim sensed had little to do with criminal activity after all. "You only served 6 years," Nilsson observed. "Not cut out for recon?" "I guess not." "What rank did you achieve?" "E4. The detective lurking in the shadows finally spoke. "What do corporals earn nowadays, Marine?" "About 50K. The detective whistled. "That's even less than we make. Not a lot for all they ask you to do, is it?" "I didn't have a family to support or anything. It was enough." Maksim leaned over and put his mouth against Val's ear. The faded scent of mint shampoo tickled his nose. "Don't offer any extra information. You just opened a new door for them." "Speaking of family," Nilsson made a show of shuffling a few papers as if she were searching for something. Calculation whirred in her eyes. "I see here that you have no living relatives. Your mother committed suicide in November, and your father was murdered just last month. I'm sorry, that must have been difficult." The Adam's apple in Val's throat worked hard, bobbing up and down as he swallowed convulsively. "You probably took care of them while they were alive. Seems like they were getting on in years. Had you late in life, Val said nothing. "That father of yours, he needed some looking after. Got himself into trouble now and then, huh? Let's see. charged with check fraud in '99 and then again in 2002. There was an embezzlement charge in 2007. Somehow the charges always got dropped. Fancy that." Her smile was more of a grimace. "That must have been real stressful for a good son like you." "Is this train ever going to reach a station, Detective?" Maksim drawled. "Or are you enjoying twisting the knife?" Nilsson raised her hands, palm up, in a pacifying gesture, but immediately followed up with a quick verbal combo punch to his client's gut. "The last bit of trouble your father put his foot in was an arrest last summer. Corruption of a minor who was turning tricks out of a strip club called Bare Essentials. Much nastier than his usual petty crime. But oh, look at this." Her eyes widened in mock surprise. The charges were dropped yet again. "Surprise, surprise," sneered her partner. "You know who posted his bail? That's the kicker. It was the owner of the club, Mr. Robert Esposito, the man from whose apartment we caught you fleeing this morning." She leaned back in her chair and spread her hands wide in a helpless gesture. It was an invitation for Val to jump in and explain, to fill the incriminating silence with words. Maksim reached beneath the table and rested a hand firmly on his client's leg. The hard muscle beneath his palm was bunched and quivering. No matter how Val schooled his expression, his tense body language screamed conflict, and the detectives weren't deaf. Maksim ran interference. "You can understand why my client is so distressed, Detective Nilsson. Not only has he lost his entire family in the span of a few short months, your officers then informed him that the man he intended to visit, a former friend of his departed father, was brutally murdered." "He didn't need to be informed. He saw the body." "Did he?" Maksim gave the leg beneath his hand a warning squeeze. Val's thigh twitched. "Did he admit to such?" "He was fleeing the scene." "He was walking down a street near an old friend's apartment. Perhaps he changed his mind about a visit. Perhaps he thought it was too early to wake the victim. Did you find his prints?" "Forensics is still processing the scene." "Did you discover a weapon on him?" "There are plenty of places to stash something like that." Maksim knew his smile didn't reach his eyes. "And I'm sure your officers are running through each of those places with a fine-tooth comb, to no avail as yet." He enjoyed this part, the part when his opponents smelled blood in the water and realized it was their own. The junior Boy Scout holding up the wall and back did a poor job of hiding his discomfort, but Nilsson merely looked annoyed. Maksim aggravated her further by asking, "Surely there must have been witnesses to his leaving the apartment, since you're so sure of his presence there?" Nilsson clenched her teeth. "We're going over statements and reviewing camera footage." "Indeed. At this point, any one of those witnesses is just as plausible a suspect as my client. Is this a fishing expedition, Detective?" "The victim was stabbed multiple times and his carotid was slit," the male detective snapped. "Esposito wasn't a small guy. With his training, your client is one of the few who could pull off something like that." Maksim had already heard Val's withering assessment of the killer's methods. He didn't always trust clients to open their mouths, lest they incriminate themselves, but Valentine Rivetti had shown himself to be a young man of considerable restraint. His professional disgust with the overkill was both disturbing and convincing. Val looked at him askance. Maksim raised a brow. It was an uncharacteristic show of trust, allowing his client an unscripted response. Perhaps he was coming down with something. The flu had been tearing through his office for weeks, and the constant rain made it impossible to shake the January chill. Then again, perhaps he was overworked, and people like Phil the desk sergeant were correct when they declared him on a one-way ticket to burnout. My training... Val licked his lips. I'm cross-trained in recon and the scout snipers. I wouldn't even need to be in the same room to kill him. Or I could get behind him and snap his neck before he knew I was there. Why would I use a knife? And if I did use a knife, why wouldn't I just slit his throat? Why stab him? That's classic amateur overkill. The human wall ornament in the back looked unimpressed, but Nilsson had a speculative twist to her thin lips. The more pressing question is, how could my client viciously stab a man, make the weapon disappear without a trace, and then depart without a speck of blood on him? We swabbed for trace evidence. Maksim rolled his eyes. Trace evidence, my ass, Nilsson. He'd be covered in blood, and you know it. Did you see his boots? Polished like a drill instructor is waiting to inspect. Stand up, Mr. Rivetti, and show the lady your boots. Val had already pushed his chair back when Nilsson snarled. Stay in your damn chair, Rivetti. She glared at Maksim. This isn't a courtroom, Kovalenko. There isn't a jury here to impress, so you can stow the theatrics. I'm just making sure we're all on the same page, Detective. Let's draw back the curtain and see what's really going on here. There's no weapon, no witnesses, no evidence of any sort. You arrested my client for being in the wrong place at the wrong time when an old friend of his father's was tragically murdered. I'm certain there's a veritable plethora of suspects with a better motive than my client, considering the victim ran a club that trafficked underage girls. Okay, Mr. Rivetti. Nilsson attempted to recapture her momentum, but the ball was no longer in her court. Maksim had sent it into the stands, and it wasn't coming back. Their momentum was broken. What were you doing outside Mr. Esposito's apartment? Maksim removed the hand he'd kept on Val's leg for far too long. They hadn't discussed a strategy for this question, but he was willing to let it ride for the time being. He laced his fingers together on the tabletop with the apparent ease of an attorney who knew what his client would say. He couldn't recall the last time he'd trusted a client not to fuck up his own case. Val stared down at his lap for so long it appeared he couldn't bring himself to answer. But just as Maksim prepared to step in, he said hoarsely, Pop wasn't an easy man. He always wanted to be a big shot. He made a lot of mistakes. But he was a real family man, you know. His gaze flickered up, but it wasn't the detectives he looked at. Maksim gave an encouraging nod. He changed while I was away. Started hanging around Esposito's club, sleeping with girls younger than me. Then he got himself killed in an alley outside a damn massage parlor, and I just wanted to know what was going through his mind at the end. I thought I could ask around with his old buddies and see where his head was this past year. Before dawn? Nilsson asked skeptically. If he'd expected his tale to garner any sympathy, he must have been sorely disappointed. Val scratched his eyebrow sheepishly. I had a lot to drink the night before. It's the only reason I came up with the dumb fucking idea in the first place. Like I was going to get any closure talking to the scrub who bilked my pop for all his money at a titty bar. Had you ever spoken to Mr. Esposito before? No. Maksim observed warily as Nilsson prepared to shift tracks. She relaxed into her seat, hooked one ankle over her knee, and casually asked, What do you do for work, Mr. Rivetti? I'm unemployed. Have you had employment since being discharged from the Marine Corps? No, ma'am. Maksim suspected that was a bold-faced lie. If he had enough money squirreled away to cover bail, he was doing something off the books to earn it. But many of Maksim's clients were skilled liars, and they lied about all and sundry even when there was no need. Between the hidden income and his father's known association with the Russo crime family, there was just no way Valentine Rivetti was not mobbed up. But that was irrelevant to his present case, and while Maksim himself couldn't willfully lie, it wasn't his responsibility to police the honesty of his clients. If it were, he would have no clients. How do you pay for that apartment of yours? It's a studio on Division.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?